I am really excited for today's conversation with two tremendous broadcasters. Dave Wills and Andy Freed have been the radio voices of the Tampa Bay Rays since 2005, and they've been gracious enough to come on with me and talk some shop for a little bit. Guys, how are you?
We are hanging in there, just like you. Why is it taking us this long finally to do this? I'm glad you took the initiative. We appreciate it very much. And believe me, we're big Lightning fans too.
Yeah, looking forward to this chat. And, honestly, wish we were a little busier. Got a nice text yesterday from a good friend of all of ours, Paul Gatt. And Paul said that we probably would be on our second box of Timbits if we were up in Toronto like we were supposed to be this week. And, so it's a little depressing that we're not actually working right now, but great to chat with you. And I'm really looking forward to this whole showcase here today.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the radio announcers, when they go on the road, get the engineer usually in the city where the game is being played. And a lot of the cities that have baseball and hockey teams, often it's the same engineer. So I know that we maybe don't see each other a lot, but we see a lot of the same people a lot. Paul works with me when the Lightning play the Leafs in Toronto and you guys play the Blue Jays, and there are other common denominators around the league for both of us. But, I don't know if you guys get this. I get asked not infrequently by fans whether I know you guys. And the short answer is yes, I do know you. We've met. And usually if we're communicating, it's over text, it's brief. And I thought it would be really interesting to learn a little bit more about the road that you both took to get to the Rays, and also learn about what it's like to be a Major League Baseball broadcaster and how that maybe compares and differs from being an NHL broadcaster. And I guess I would begin here, and beginning with the first job, the first professional job, because in many ways, that first job is the hardest job to get because you have to find a way to break in. And for me, I decided I wanted to be a play-by-play broadcaster when I was in college and was doing a variety of different games and a variety of different sports for our college radio station. And I wasn't a dummy. I looked around and saw, well, look, hockey and baseball have the most job openings because they have the most advanced minor league systems. But there are a lot of people who are going to be applying for baseball jobs. So maybe I should focus on hockey where there's a little less competition, and it worked out for me. But I'm glad it worked out for both of you guys as well, even though you maybe went into the bigger pool with more applicants and more competition. And I'm just wondering, how did that first job come about? Let's start with you, Andy.
Well, for me, I didn't really grow up in a sports-oriented family. My uncle took me to a baseball game in 1979, and I instantly fell in love with it. And during the game, there was a big long rain delay, and we walked around the concourse, and I can remember hearing these disembodied voices. As people were gathered in, I could hear something coming through the speakers, and for some reason, I found it fascinating, interesting. Who are these people that are talking? And my uncle told me that it was the broadcasters of the Baltimore Orioles, Chuck Thompson and Bill O'Donnell. And for some reason, I just found it very interesting. And that night I could write volumes on what that night did for me in my life. I always say whatever trajectory my life would have taken, it hit a fork in the road when I went to Memorial Stadium and saw the Orioles and the Brewers, and Eddie Murray homered and Mike Flanagan threw a complete game. And I can tell you everything about that game. It just really changed the trajectory. And I fell in love with it and decided right there, then that night, that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And that's kind of the way it ended up planning out. But I didn't, and I don't recommend this to other people, but I didn't really have a plan B. This is just kind of what I always wanted to do, and practiced it during high school, and helped really get our college radio station going at Towson University, and then went to the winter meetings and got a job in minor league baseball and spent 11 years doing that. And one thing I learned then is that if you can find a partner that you enjoy working with, then that is such an important thing. And thankfully, even though Dave and I didn't know each other when we met each other, it was a very easy connection. I don't know how chemistry happens. I don't think it can be forced, but for some reason, I really enjoyed working with Dave. And here we are, 15. I was going to say 16 seasons in, but we're still waiting for the 16th to get started. But that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of it. And from a hockey standpoint, I'm very grateful to this guy because one of my favorite parts of our season every year, because I didn't grow up in a hockey town. I grew up in Baltimore. We had the Skipjacks. It was an AHL team. And I did see them, and it was fun. I saw the Capitals in D.C., and that was kind of cool. But I didn't really understand hockey, and I'm still not all that professed in it. But every year on the road, I really enjoyed going out with Dave and watching Lightning games and the Stanley Cup playoffs. Whether the Lightning are playing or not, because I kind of learned hockey through Dave, because Dave did grow up in a hockey town.
Was that first job, Andy, you said you got a job at the winter meetings. Was that a job that you knew was open? Like, where was your first job in the minors?
It was in Florida, actually. It was the St. Lucie Mets over on the east coast of the state. And I graduated college and didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And there's no great handbook on how to get into baseball. I remember I didn't know, do I send audition materials to the radio stations or the teams, or didn't know what to do. So I just flooded the market. I just sent them everywhere. Somewhere in dumpsters all around the country and in Canada, there's resumes and auditions from 1993 and 94 for me. But I ended up getting a job. In fact, the man that was hiring WPSL on the east coast of the state in Port St. Lucie, Greg Wyatt was one of the original 7 anchormen at ESPN when they started in '79. By that point, he and his wife, Carol, who was a reporter at CNN, they had not retired, but they had left their broadcasting gigs after long careers and started a very small radio station in Port St. Lucie, Florida. And they were going to be doing the St. Lucie Mets games, and they were also allowed to do the New York Mets games during spring training locally over their station. So it was a terrific gig. And I think they told me there was 200 or 250 applicants, and somehow, some way they wanted mine. And I had only been able to put together a tape because I had an internship with the I'm from Baltimore, and with the Orioles. And the last couple of years at Memorial Stadium and first 2 years at Camden Yards, I was set up with a tape recorder and was constantly recording myself and doing fake games. Not fake games, the fake broadcast of actual games. And so it was a great place and time. I got a chance to know John Miller, the voice of the Orioles, very well. And he was awesome. He put in a phone call for me also, not only then, but eventually to get the then Devil Rays job. So he was a wonderful, not only resource, but has become a very good friend. And lo and behold, the St. Lucie gig happened. I spent 2 years there, and then that was enough. And spent 5 years in AA in Trenton. Met what became my wife, and moved to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and spent 4 years in AAA. And then the Rays opened up in '05, and got a chance to meet a fellow named Dave Wills, and we've kind of been having our own party ever since.
So, Dave, I either read or heard somewhere, might have been from you actually, telling an anecdote. You were a pitcher, right? Like, were you a player looking to get into baseball as a career before you became a broadcaster?
You know, I just as Andy was going through his memories, I started to think, well, you know, both you guys said how much you worked for the college radio station. I really didn't have that opportunity all that much because I was playing baseball at Elmhurst College. And as I started to get those memories, my shoulders started to hurt again, going back to the last couple times I was on that mound. But
just like Sandy Koufax, right?
You always have aspirations. I mean, I did. I grew up wanting to play. I was very intrigued by broadcasting gig as well. I mean, I always joke around, you know, when you grow up around Harry Carey and Lloyd Pettit and Jim Durham and some of those great announcers, Pat Foley, now with the Chicago Blackhawks. I mean, you know, Jack Brickhouse. I was fortunate to be in the big city of Chicago, grow up in the south suburbs, and hear some outstanding announcers. And you know, and again, being a fan of all those different sports, you know, becoming a fan of all those different broadcasters. But yeah, I really was hoping that you know, maybe baseball could be the gig, but 81 mile an hour fastballs just don't cut it, even back in 1986. So. I did get Joe Girardi out, and I do remind him of that often when we see him. We saw him during the postseason a little bit. He was 0 for 1 against me, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't going to cut it. So halfway through college, about the summer of my junior year, there was a company back then called phone programs. 976-1212 was the number you'd call to get the weather. 976-1313 you'd call to get the sports. And we had Sports Phone Extra. We had the horse racing line. We had the wrestling line. And they were starting to expand. And I heard about it, applied for a gig, and got a part-time gig. And then 2 weeks later, they came to me and said, would you like to start working for me full-time? And I did. I took a full-time job halfway through my junior year of college. And took me a little bit longer to finish school then, because I did continue to play baseball for one more year. But, you know, when I look back at the alumni on that particular stretch there, you had Brian Wheeler, who became the voice of the Portland Trailblazers. Jeff Joniak became the voice of the Chicago Bears. Chris Mattson for a long time was the voice of the Anaheim Ducks. And, you know, I think Howie Rose might even been a member of Sports Phone in New York City. So I was, you know, again, it's a pretty interesting gig, but like you guys were saying, I wanted to do play-by-play, and it really wasn't a play-by-play job. It was a 1-minute sports anchoring gig. So I kind of got bored with it after covering a Super Bowl in 1988. And then my Forrest Gump life took over. I went into coaching for a couple of years. I was the head baseball coach at the University of Chicago. Called up my former pitching coach, who was a manager in the Orioles organization, to be a reference on my resume. He said, nope, not going to do it. I want you to get out of coaching and get back into broadcasting. And this was a guy that was coaching in Wausau, Wisconsin, who spent his winter in Australia. And I wondered, well, how's he going to know about a job opening? And sure enough, the team in Wausau was moving to suburban Chicago. And so I sent in a tape of me doing a game from the mid-'80s at Wrigley Field from the catwalks. And the ownership group heard it, called me up, said, we'd like to talk to you about becoming the voice of the Kane County Cougars. And I did. I went in for a couple of interviews. I got hired. The GM at the time told me, here's what your gig's going to be. It's going to be about 70% sales, 20% PR and marketing, and then maybe we'll mix in a few games here and there. But I think what happened with that was he just got sick of taking phone calls from everybody asking if they've named a radio guy yet. Have you named a radio guy yet? We had Chicago guys coming in. We had longtime suburban guys. Steve Klauke was a guy who grew up in that area, I guess, and he was telling everybody he had the gig. And he called up one day and talked to our GM, and our GM said, no, you don't have the gig Dave Will says. And that's how I found out I got the play-by-play job with the Cougars. And he ended up moving out to Salt Lake City, and I think is celebrating his 33rd year as voice of as the legendary voice of the Salt Lake City Bees. So, it kind of worked out. And then that radio station reached about 2.5 million people, almost 3 million people. And the White Sox heard, and then I moved on to the White Sox for about 10 years. And then in December of 2004, I was in North Carolina for a UIC basketball game. And I got a phone call from somebody who said, would you be interested in applying for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays job? And this was on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon. And I honestly said, I'm not 100% sure I want to do it. I hadn't heard too many glowing things about the Devil Rays organization. My wife and I had just moved into a house in Orland Park that was only a couple blocks from her sister's, less than a mile from her mom's. We gutted it and fixed it up to everything that she liked and planned on being there for the rest of our lives. And I actually sat on it for a week and then finally put together a CD and sent it out. And from what I understand, that of the 300 people that they had applied for the gig, they already went down to the final 10 when my CD arrived on that particular day. And thankfully, the individual who was in charge of the search decided just to play it and said, hey, the guy sent it in, I'll listen to it. And he said he listened to it and brought some more people from the committee in and said, I think we have our 11th person of our final 10. And I was kind of fortunate that they put me into the ring there. And then, as Andy said, the rest is history. We first met, I think, at FanFest. We had never known each other. I honestly hadn't never heard of Andy before. And we had a nice meeting at FanFest, had a dinner at Moon Underwater. And then we had to do a couple of games, practice games, even before we went on the air. And I was a little chagrined by that because I said, well, what are they going to do if we don't sound good? Fire us and look to hire 2 new guys? I mean, but it took us about less than 2 batters for us to really kind of connect. And by the time the second inning was halfway over, I just looked at Andy and I said, I don't think we need to do anymore. I think we've got this covered. And here we are now 16 years later.
I want to back up a little bit because you kind of breezed right through this chronology, but you did take a job with the White Sox. And I understand that was pregame, postgame. And that's a pretty bold move. Now you're going to the majors, but you're giving up the play-by-play. Was that a tough decision at the time to take that job?
Well, that job at that particular time was actually, it did have play-by-play.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Included it. There was John Rooney, who was the lead play-by-play guy for the White Sox, was missing every Sunday game at least to do, at that time, the Westwood One, I believe it was, game of the week on CBS radio. So he would miss at least every Sunday game, and sometimes a Saturday, depending on where the game was and where the White Sox were. So I knew going in that I was probably going to end up doing about 20 to 25 games every single year. And then on top of that, then about halfway through the year, he got the job as like the number 4 guy with Fox TV. So it turned out that I went from doing 20 to 25 games to, I think for those couple of years, I was doing close to 40, 45 games, because he would have to leave on Friday sometimes to go to a ball game that he had to do on Saturday afternoon. So, the jump from A-ball to the big leagues was a pretty impressive one. To go from doing games in Waterloo, Iowa to, Los Angeles and New York was mind-boggling at times, but it really was a great gig. And then it allowed me to do some pregame and postgame to kind of hone those skills. So there's my dog Bella saying hi to somebody. But, it was one of those things where it really was a no-brainer at that particular time. Yes, that would I'd like to have done every single game, but to get an opportunity to do 35 to 40 games a year was absolutely incredible.
I spent 11 years in the minors, and doing the math, Andy, is the same as you, which I didn't know until you just mentioned that. And hockey and baseball, play-by-play, like there's some obvious differences. Certainly, I want to get into the challenges of calling a baseball game and calling a baseball game well. But the most obvious part of calling a hockey game well, like the first building block, is making sure that you can keep up with the play, identifying the players and keeping up with the play. Because if you can't, it's kind of like trying to run up a muddy hill with slippers. Like you're constantly in catch-up mode. And what I found with my time in the minors, I was able to perfect, if that's the right word, or at least enhance that part of my play-by-play. If I had been dropped into an NHL press box right out of school, I would have been completely ill-prepared. And as you move up, the pace gets faster and faster and faster. So I really benefited from my time in the minors, and I think it prepared me in that regard specifically, as well as some other areas in terms of being an NHL broadcaster. In what ways did your time in the minors help you or prepare you for the majors?
Very similarly to yours, in a number of ways, not the least of which being it gave me an appreciation for what other people are doing in a baseball franchise, because in the minor leagues, you're doing everything. If it's raining, you're pulling tarp. It's time to sell tickets. It's time to sell advertising. It's time to work with the mascot. It's time to go to schools with the mascot and do different literacy programs we had done. So you really get a sense of what the general manager is doing, of what the ownership has to deal with. So it in some ways, it's like a big league club on a small scale. So I think all of us, and Dave Wills here also got a chance to spend some time in the minor leagues. Neil Solondz, who we work with, also spent a long time in the minor leagues. I think it really gives you a perspective of when you get to the big leagues, what other people are doing. And that's very, very, very important. I think especially in these times, having some, I don't know if the word is sympathy or what, for what some of the other departments of our franchise, I'm sure the same thing with the Lightning, are having to deal with. I mean, this is very deal. I don't know if I would have had that appreciation fully, having not lived through it through the minor leagues. In terms of play-by-play, as you both know, the only way to get better at this field is just to do it. I still have my minor league tapes. I listen to them every once in a while. They're completely cringeworthy. No one's ears will ever hear those tapes except for me. I don't even know why I still keep them sometimes, because they're embarrassing. You think something's really good, and then you listen back a couple of years later and go, "Oh my God, I stunk!" But probably my worst critic, which is actually a good thing, because I think you do these games and you do 140 of them in single A and 142 at double A and 144 triple A and 162 in the majors, constantly going through and listing what you like, what you don't like. I like the way I did that. I didn't like the way I did that. But having other people that you respect, like you mentioned, John Miller, I'd send him my tapes all the time, and he'd say, you know, why are you using so many words here when you really could have summed it up with 5 words here instead of this wordy thing you went on with? I remember Gary Cohen, the voice of the Nets, telling me one time that he liked my tape. He goes, but you keep burying the lead. Say, is the guy safe or out? And then you can go into some flowery description. People are listening not to see how good you may or may not be. They want to know, what's the score? Was the guy out? Was he safe? Is it gone? Is it fair? Is it foul? You know what? So, and the only way to do that is to just do it over and over. And just the way we humans are made, if you keep doing something via repetition, you can't help but get better if you're being honest with yourself in terms of criticism. Self-criticism is very important, and accepting criticism without ego from others, I think, is very important also. To know that if someone says, hey, I don't like what you're doing, and here's why, that's way more valuable than a broadcaster saying, hey, I think that's good. That, to me, that got me nothing. So to this day, when announcers send me tapes, I always say to them, I'm going to do my best to rip this to shreds. And it's not because I don't like you or not because I don't think it's good. It's because I want to give you something that you could actually push off from and think, hey, maybe that's not a bad idea. So that to me, the time in the minor leagues, and also because baseball is one of those games, you can never know it all. I remember when I was an intern with the Orioles, the public address announcer of Memorial Stadium in Camden Yards was a fellow named Rex Barney, who was a pitcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He threw a no-hitter once, in fact. He had a long career. And I'd sit down and just ask him questions, just because I'm for whatever weird reason just endlessly fascinated with the game of baseball. And some other local reporter went by, and he had asked some really arrogant questions to the manager, as I remember. And he kind of walked around with an air of knowing. And I remember Rex pointing to that guy and saying, "See that guy? He's never really going to get anywhere because he thinks he knows all the answers because he's been around here for a couple of years." He goes, "Never think that you have all the answers in baseball. There's always a different opinion that is valuable. There's always different input. There's always a different perspective on a play. You can always talk to someone else, talk to an umpire, talk to a player. That can give you a whole way of looking differently at what just happened. And if you ever go into this thinking you know it all, and I'm sure it's the same about hockey, you're just setting yourself up for failure. And I would much rather have a play happen and say, I don't understand what happened. And then the next day come back and say, we talked to the umpires, we talked to the manager, we talked to the players involved and explain what actually happened. If I honestly didn't know what happened, then to just make it up and make it sound like I know everything. To me, the greatest thing about baseball is that you never know it all. You can constantly learn about the game. There's constantly history that can be learned. It's been around for such a long time. So this is a wordy answer, but I think all of those things can come your way from the minor leagues. And I wouldn't be the same person without all that time in minor leagues.
How about you, Dave?
Exactly what he mentioned, and whenever I talk to any prospective play-by-play broadcaster, it's like playing the game. I remember going back to the first time I took the mound in high school or college to the last time I took the mound in college, to how much the game slowed down. And I think that's the same way when it comes to broadcasting a game. It seems like, again, preparation is a key. We do a lot of reading before a game. You do a lot of game note reading. We don't have that opportunity. You don't have that information in the minor leagues like we do at the big league level. So you have to go dig a little deeper. You have to probably spend a little more time with each player at the minor league level, which we did because we were a little closer in age back those days. But, so you find some little tidbits about the players. Spend a lot of time. I did after ball games with the coaches. One of my big sponsors was Old Style, and back in Chicago, and they would, wherever we went, depending on how many days we were in that city, they would drop off a couple cases of beer in my room from the local distributor. And then after the game, the coaches, Carlos Tosca, Joel Youngblood, some of the guys in the past, Lynn Jones, the manager, the base coach, and the pitching coach, Brian Peterson, would come to my room afterward, and we'd watch Sports Center and talk about the game. And I'd learn, again, having played the game, having coached the game at the college level, I thought I knew the game pretty well. And I think the nuts and bolts of the game, but there's a big difference in professional baseball and professional sports. You're dealing with a lot of other things, especially in professional baseball. When I was a college coach, we played 3, maybe 4 times a week tops. When you're playing every single day, sometimes 16, 17, 21 days in a row, I was figuring with the manager, I'm 2 or 3 moves ahead along with him. He's thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead in that game, but he's also thinking 3 and 4 days in advance because of how he has to use his pitching staff. And those were things I learned down in the minor leagues. But I think the biggest thing, again, was just the repetition of doing games, learning how to prepare for games. You'd rather have 100 things at your fingertips to use for the broadcast and use 20 than be ready, only have 10 and need 15. And I'd rather spend extra time and not have that information available or have to use that information, as opposed to next thing you know, I skipped over a couple notes today because I was lazy, and now you need something because the game goes to the next inning. So preparation is a big key. It was the same way in the minor leagues. It's the same way in the big leagues. But I think, again, things have slowed down the more and more you do this. Just like playing, as you broadcast, the game slows down. It allows you to describe the game a little bit better sometimes. And I think in the minor leagues, a lot of us, I worked at times with by myself, especially on road games, but I was fortunate to have a partner for a lot of home games, and even a former big leaguer, and Bill Melton, who would come out every once in a while and do games with me. And Jimmy Pearsall came and did a few games with me, which was an absolute dream come true, because that's my dream broadcast group, Harry Carey and Jimmy Pearsall. So, but preparation's a big part of it. And I think, again, having to do that on your own in the minor leagues, digging for, we didn't have a nice game note package like we do at the big league level. We had to do a lot of it on our own. And I think that prepped me for going on to the big leagues as well.
Dave, I want to ask you about hockey also, because, and I didn't override this here, but it just got me thinking. In my time in the minor leagues, I found that almost 100% of the time, maybe 99, maybe you get a guy on a bad day, but that people are really willing to share information, that are willing to share their stories. And the minor league setting is so good for that. Like Dave's saying, going out with the coaches after the game. I did the same thing back then too. Is it like that in hockey? I found that in baseball, especially in the minors, guys are really, if they sense that you're genuine about your interest in learning, that they're more than happy to share their stories or their information or their opinions in an effort to help you learn something. Was it like that for you in the minor leagues in hockey also?
Very much so. And I think it's typical that at the minor league level, the broadcasters you mentioned in baseball is doing more than just broadcasting. So I don't think I had 70% sales like you were told, Dave, in the minors, but it was a fair amount of sales, particularly during the off season. But, I was the PR person too. So your relationship with the players does change when you get to the majors, because basically you're the broadcaster at the major league level. At the minor league level, you have a different hat that you're wearing. And just as an example, like if a player was robbed of an assist in a game, which can happen, and we're talking about a time when replays weren't quite as prevalent. Now, no one's going to mistake whether a guy hit a home run or not, but sometimes in a bang-bang hockey play, they may give 1 assist where it should have been 2, or they got the wrong guy. And it's locked in. Like that ink is dried. The stats are in. And the player's saying, I got an assist on that goal. Well, who was the one to go correct it? Me. I was the PR person. And so it's just a different dynamic to the relationship. To your point, Andy, I think in terms of sharing information or sharing stories or sharing background, that has been consistent at every level in hockey. And I can't speak for baseball players because I've never really been in a baseball clubhouse, but I think most athletes are interested in talking to you if you show an interest in them. And a genuine interest. Yes, for sure. All right, we're going to break here, guys, because we have 4 minutes left, and I know we're going to go past that on the next question I have. So I'm going to sign off. I'm going to send you guys, if you guys are good on time, I'm going to send you a new link. We'll start it up again, and we'll start recording. Okay.
All right, we'll be waiting.
Continuing with the longtime radio voices of the Tampa Bay Rays, Dave Wilf and Andy Fried. And there was a time about probably 7 years ago now that I was able to spend an inning in the booth with you guys. I went to a Rays game. You guys graciously invited me up. And you were carrying on a conversation. I think we were talking about the Hawks, if memory served, Dave, because you're a Hawks fan and they had just won the Cup. What struck me was you asked me a question, I started answering it, and then there's a pitch. And look, there are certain challenges, certainly, to calling a hockey game, but one of those challenges isn't kind of this tap dance between having a conversation and then getting into the play. In hockey, there's play, and then it stops, and then you move on to conversation, and then play starts again. And to me, that's one of the greatest challenges in calling a baseball game well. And for me, when I can listen, particularly on radio, to baseball announcers who make the time between pitches sound seamless, that's as good as it gets. How tough of a skill is that? How long did it take you guys to reach a point where you kind of mastered that dance between talking about a topic, but also keeping your eye literally on the ball so you stayed in touch with what was happening on the field?
Like I think we go back again to the minor leagues when you don't have a partner. There's a lot of things you have to do. And I always kind of felt like my partner then was the guy that was listening, whether he's at home in the living room and sitting on his, lazy boy and tuning in that way, or maybe somebody's driving around and they're my partner. I never wanted to feel like I was talking at you. I wanted to feel like I was talking with you. And I think that's the ultimate compliment that Andy and I get a lot of times from people who listen to our games. They feel like, and I'm sitting at my bar right now in my Dave's dugout area, where people say, I feel like I'm sitting next to you at a bar while we're watching a game together. Or, I know Andy told a story one time about somebody said, you guys are almost like the guys at MASH, where you're performing surgery, but you're still having this great conversation with one another and joking around. And while you're still paying attention to making sure that this is clamped and this is stitched. And but we feel like we're right there with you and being entertained. And so, yeah, it just comes back to doing games, just figuring out the best. It's pacing, it's timing. I think the other thing too is one of the things that I've learned over the years, and it's choice. It's my choice. Maybe some broadcasters don't agree with this, but a 1-1 pitch or a 1-0 pitch that misses by 3 feet while we're in the middle of a story. What's the consequence of that pitch other than it's 2-0? Nobody missed anything. It was a bad pitch, and so we kind of continue on with the story. But at the end of the day, yes, it is about what's going on between those white lines, what's happening down in the field, and that's the main thing. But I think, again, just trying to be good company. I know I'm stealing some of Andy's lines, but we just try to be good company. And then, like I said, it's just a matter of repetition, doing games time after time where the pacing, the being able to figure out when you should get excited. I mean, I remember Jimmy Pearsall telling me that my first year of the minor leagues. He said when he came to the ballpark, I was just couldn't believe he was going to sit in and do some innings with me. He ended up doing the whole game. But he said, I was listening to you yesterday, and you were yelling in the first inning, and you were yelling in the second inning. You were going crazy in the third. Harry Carey told me you got to kind of build up to it. And, so all those things, all those little things you learn, listening to other broadcasters too, Dave, I think that's in this, wonderful world now of being able to listen to all the games on the MLB app or on XM, Sirius XM, the opportunity to figure out how other people do it. And you take little tidbits and little morsels from all of them. But, again, just the more you do the games, the more you're comfortable with the guy that, and the person, especially in two-man booths, that person has to understand that you have to mix in the play-by-play as well. There are, we listen to a lot of games where, the second guy in the booth is almost oblivious to what's going on down in the field sometimes, and you have to cut them off. But I'm fortunate that Andy is not that way. I think that's the beauty, too, of having two broadcasters in the booth as opposed to a broadcaster and a former player who isn't really up to, knowing about the timing and when he should stop talking and how to allow the broadcaster or the play-by-play guy at that time to describe what's exactly going on.
The line of just trying to be good company, like Dave said, that's I think a really good approach to this, because if you approach this thinking, and this might be different than hockey, because in hockey, the listener really may actually be sitting there listening to everything that you say because the intensity of it is so pressure filled. But in baseball, that's not the way. You're maybe in a postseason setup, but most nights I get the sense that we're portable, that we're with people in their cars, we're with people, especially down here in Florida, we're on their boats, they're doing yard work, they're doing something outside, they're hanging out with their families, they're barbecuing out back, and you probably go in and out a little bit. And maybe when your voice rises because a big moment's happening, maybe they stop for a second, hey, what happened? But basically when someone puts on the radio, they want to hear what the score of the game is. I also think too that, especially in cars, radio will always be an important medium. You can't watch TV when you're driving. And to be sitting there on someone's shoulder as they're driving, or if they're sitting in back-to-back traffic, or they're stuck on a bridge, or to make that moment of their lives a little bit better is really, I think, I don't want to say important because that makes it sound, like we're doing surgery or something, but I think there's a level of importance to that. I think if you're making someone's life a little more easy look, we all hate getting stuck in traffic. We all hate sometimes your commute. So if you can provide something during that time that allows them to feel a little bit better about things and maybe get them lost in what's happening in the game, if you can come up with a description that really kind of puts them at the ballpark, even though they're not there. And a lot of that is shutting up. A lot of that is letting the crowd do your job for you. To me, the crowd noise just gives me chills to this day. I think one of the great artists to ever do this has been Scully, and I know he's gotten a lot of praise since he's retired, but he was probably past where he lost his fastball, I think, in those last couple of years. If you listen to him in his prime, and maybe even into his 60s and 70s, he was like a machine in how good he was. It felt like, and I heard this said of him, it felt like the game was pausing for him. He'd be telling a story and he'd know just when to take a break, and he'd know just when to take a breath, and he'd know when the intensity would be. It was like he was ahead of the game. So he's like the only guy I've ever heard that could actually do it the way he did. And the invention of the transistor radio out in Los Angeles, I think, was a big part of what has eventually become now walking around with these things. Because, Chuck Thompson was my favorite announcer growing up in Baltimore, and he told a story about he was doing an Orioles-Angels game, and something happened. There was a pitching change and a pitcher was coming in. There was a lull, and he heard this enormous roar from the crowd. And as you both know, if something's happening and you don't know what's going on, as the broadcaster, it almost makes you panic for a second. Well, he figured out from looking down into the crowd that there were people that were listening to the Dodger game on transition, and somebody for the Dodgers had just hit a home run. And that's the luck that Vin Scully had on the listenership of Southern California, is that people wanted to be with him all the time. So, if you can accomplish that in this field, there's not much more you can accomplish. You can be good company and a storyteller. That's why people voted him the most important member in history of the Dodgers, more than Jackie Robinson, more than, Duke Snyder. It's because Scully was there for so long, and he felt like he helped raise you from being a little kid until you had kids. The generation to generation. So the relationship, I think, that you can build over the radio, if you can actually be good company, is something that is unrivaled even by television.
I think the other thing, though, too, Dave, kind of getting back to what you were talking about, intertwining some stories within an at-bat or between pitches or between outs. I think it's almost like comparing a first liner to a fourth liner. I mean, there are certain batters where you really are kind of not expecting a whole lot to happen. So you maybe are mixing in a few more stories because you're trying to maybe boost up the entertainment value of that particular at bat. But when Evan came to the plate, or in the last couple of years, Tommy Pham, or Austin Meadows last year especially, there was no additional entertainment needed. Everybody was tuned in to find out what was happening when those particular individuals came to the plate, and so you didn't have to weave in some stories to keep people locked in. They were locked in when the big boys come up to the plate. And I'm sure it's the same way in hockey. When the first liners are out there and you're expecting something to happen, there's no need to build up or to, use, big words or anything like that to kind of build up the moment. The moment's there because those guys are probably going to do something and you want to get out of the way of that. You don't need to build that up. So I think that kind of also, again, like I said, though, just comes with having done, doing the game. I mean, we even kind of joked over the years. There were a few years back where there were guys who came up to the plate and we actually turned our heads and wouldn't even watch what happened. I mean, we knew that nothing was going to happen. So, you try to have a little fun, but, again, like I said, I think we all kind of, the moment when individual batters come up that this guy, he's why people are tuned in right now. And when other guys might come up on other teams or whatever, and even on your team, that might be the time to kind of build the momentum up a little bit because they're not expecting too much.
One of the other really difficult challenges in calling a baseball game is how the pacing can change at the blink of an eye. So in hockey, for example, typically, there are points in a game of 5-on-3 where there's a good chance a goal may happen or a greater chance, but generally the pace of play stays fast. Sometimes the intensity is higher or lower, and sometimes there are more whistles or less whistles. But you basically put on your tap shoes as a play-by-play announcer, and you're moving your feet pretty quickly. And as I mentioned earlier, the benefit of doing games in the minors allows you to tap with more control rather than just going spastic with your feet. It seems to me in baseball, you're not putting on your tap shoes often, but you have to have them there because there's going to be that play where there are like 5 things happening at once. Hit down the line, guys on first, maybe he has a chance to score. There may be a cutoff, play at the plate. You have to go from that conversational tempo to something much more similar to what I'm doing over the course of a game. Is that difficult? And again, I'm kind of going back to the same question. Is it difficult? Was it difficult for you as a broadcaster to get comfortable shifting gears? So maybe you're putting your ballet shoes away and putting your tap shoes on, and then you get to put them away. But you have to have them, and you have to be ready for that and do that just as well as the other stuff.
Yeah, I heard baseball described one time as how did they say it? That the pitch comes in, and most times nothing really happens. There's not much. Like Dave said, you miss a pitch. It was a bad 1-0 pitch outside. But just when you think that nothing's going to happen, everything happens, and all hell breaks loose. To me, the most challenging and play, and where I feel good if I happen to get it all right, is a rundown play in baseball. If there's, say, it's first and third, and the pitcher throws to first, and they've got the runner caught between first and second, and you got the runner at third inching down the line, and maybe he's going to make a break for the plate, and maybe he's not, and you've got the infielders aligning to get ready for the rundown play. There's so much happening in that play. If you can nail that, then that's really good. A fly ball to the gap with a bunch of runners on base, and the wind is blowing, and you're not sure if the outfielder's going to catch it or not, and the runners don't know whether to tag or not, and some are halfway and some are tagging, and then the ball drops in, and they're setting up for the replay, and you've got 2 runners running around, and one's running right up the other's back. And I mean, those plays are so much fun to call, and they're so easy to screw up. I mean, and if you start screwing it up, then the whole thing just falls apart. And it's actually comical when you really mess it up. If you have a sense of humor in the moment, it's frustrating. But that's the beauty of it, is that those happen in the midst of 9 times out of 10, not a whole lot happens. So you're constantly gearing up and gearing down. But I think the focus of the play-by-play announcer is paramount. I mean, if you let up in baseball, without a doubt, that's the moment something's going to happen. That through the minor leagues is what I know I learned. And that's why pacing, I think, in baseball is a particular challenge, because you can get thrown off your game and start going head, fast, and you just mess everything up. And then when it's over, and you're back to the regular, now the 3-1 pitch, swung on and foul away to the right side. And, you got to let it go. So to me, it's a constant tap dance. And I love that challenge of constant focus. I know that if I've been focusing for 3 hours during a game, that sometimes my brain is tired at the end of a baseball game. and I'm physically tired at the end of the baseball game if I know I've done it right.
Yeah, I agree with Andy. I think the toughest play for us is one of those rundowns, and make sure you're getting the verbiage right and the people who have the baseball correct, the base runners, especially if there's more than just the rundown going on between, say, third and home. That there's a guy at first and you're trying to keep an eye on him if he's trying to make it to third base and what's going on, and those are still plays that to this day, every once in a while you have an issue with. And like Andy says, you kind of look back at it and you're a little disgusted maybe at the moment. But the one thing that I always try to, that we joke around, you might even hear it during our games, is there's never been a perfect broadcast. And, if we can make a mistake in the open, we can make a mistake 2 batters in, you can make a mistake with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th inning. But I don't think there's ever been a perfect live broadcast. If there is, I haven't heard it. So, if we make a mistake, you move on. And it's like that old Ken Ravizza, the late Ken Ravizza, is a great sports psychologist. And he was working with Jared Weaver on pitching. And Weaver would throw a pitch and have an issue with it and then come back and he'd still be ticked off and get ready to throw a second pitch. And Ken Ravizza said, whoa, come here. And he put 2 baseballs in his hand. And he said, all right, now try and throw a strike. He goes, well, I can't. I'm holding 2 balls. And he goes, well, that's just exactly what's going on. You can't throw your next pitch if you're still holding on to your last pitch. And I think it's the same way. I mean, I know in the minor leagues, you made a mistake, it would bother you for a couple of innings because some people looked at it as this was your demo tape you were trying to put together, and you're trying to make it the perfect demo tape to get out of the minor leagues. In the big leagues, we're where we want to be, where we want to stay. Now, obviously, you don't want to be making mistakes 6, 7, 8, 9 times a game, but you make a mistake, you move on. It's just like a player, and that's one of the things I think. Again, the same thing in our booth is that a lot of times we can laugh about it. There are times where I've tried to have Andy laugh about a mistake, and it doesn't happen until maybe the next day. But again, you live and learn, and again, it comes back with experience. I mean, I go back to 1997 when I was filling in for John Rooney. I had a chance to call not a walk-off grand slam, but Albert Bell hit a grand slam in the top of the 9th at Fenway Park. And I'm getting ready to make the call, and I was battling something with my throat for the last couple of weeks. Found out I had walking pneumonia and bronchitis, but I didn't go to the doctor to get it looked at. Well, Albert Bell hits one that had open spot in right center field, and I'm like, it's a slap, and there was nothing there. And I'm shutting the mic off, clearing my throat, drinking water. Snap. And I'm just crushed because I only do 1 or 2 games a week. This is a chance to call an incredible moment in the White Sox season. And I'm figuring it's going to be all over ESPN radio. This was before Sirius XM, so I'm really depressed about it. And then 3 days later, they're making a promo on the radio station about it. They're like, hey, Cubs fans, you might have Harry Carey, but we've got Dave Wills, so, you just had to kind of chuckle about it. And that's what I've always, whenever we make a mistake in the booth or there's an issue, I always try to tell Andy, nobody died. It's time to move along and have some fun with it.
And that's why having a good partner is important in baseball. I had someone say to me once that if you don't have a good partner, the booth can get very small. And in baseball, Dave and I we joke we see each other more than our wives when it's baseball season. So that's why the camaraderie that we have. Dave has been really good at getting me in the early years to relax. I think I've probably mellowed a little bit with regard to that over the years. But Dave was very good at saying, just shake it off, go on. And I do think I've gotten better at that, in part because Dave is good at making me laugh at something. And that's why we have lunch together just about every day on the road. And that's why we're always in touch during the off season. If you can have a partner that you're friends with, it really does help, because as I always say to Dave, there's nobody I'd rather gripe about the team to than Dave. A half hour after the game, and we're ticked off because the Rays played lousy and we lost that game. He's my sounding board, and I hope that I am for him too. So by the time I'm in the car and I'm back home, I can go back to the real world, and I'm not bringing it back to the house. But it's good to have a sounding board, and one of your best friends in the world is your partner.
You mentioned the rundown play, and I would have to guess that one of the reasons why it's challenging is you don't have a lot of them. Like if you had a rundown every inning, it's kind of like what you talked about with repetition and getting reps. And I would, just hearing you guys, it makes sense that because you don't see them that often, you don't get a chance to practice them unless you were to conjure one in your head and think about what you wanted to say. But even that probably wouldn't approximate it. You both have talked about the need for preparation. And just as a point of comparison, a hockey game day is different than a baseball game day in that under most circumstances, there's a morning practice, the morning skate it's called. And so the broadcasters come in the morning, they open the locker room after the skate. That's when we talk to players. We get the notes. Then everybody goes home. We have lunch. We have the early afternoon. The players take a nap. And we come back in the evening for the game. And I'll be frank, like I'm prepping during that time. So the game day for me might start at, 9:30, and I'm not working consistently prepping for the game up until airtime, but I'm not completely off either. Baseball is different because you're getting there in the afternoon, so you have the morning open. What does a game day look like for you guys? Are you using that time in the morning to prepare? Are you talking with one another about the broadcast for that night? Or Andy, you mentioned you have lunch together. Do you kind of meet at lunch and you start there, and then you get your work done in the afternoon leading up to the first pitch?
I think over lunch, usually on the road, I mean, we'll probably talk about the team, but we probably talk about each other's lives as much as anything, just like friends would do. What's going on at home. We're both dads. We both have had parent situations over the years, and we know each other so well that it's easy to talk about that stuff. But we'll absolutely talk about the Rays and talk about baseball and stuff maybe that we'll talk to the manager about that day. That's where working for the Rays has been really good, is that not only do we have a routine, but the PR people for the Rays and the staff for the Rays, manager, coaches, have been really willing to share information with us. And because we've been there for so long, there's a real trust factor in there that they know that we know what is appropriate, what is not appropriate for the air. That you can't help if you're with a traveling party of about 45, 50 people, you're going to find out things about them that may not be the best thing for the air. And if you go in and blabber about it because you want to break news and say, hey, look what I found out, you're not going to last very long, because these are three-dimensional people that have flaws and failings and good moments and bad moments like everyone else. So I think the trust factor is really, really big if you're with the team constantly. In terms of preparation, it never really does stop. And that's because if you love what you're doing, the old saying, if you find a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's what it is, at least for me in baseball. And I think for those of us that are in baseball, I think the only reason to really do it is because you love it. If not, it would take up so much of your time that it would feel like a chore. But the advent of Twitter has been really helpful because it can help keep you up to date on what's happening with other teams all around. You follow all the beat writers from MLB.com or the other newspapers around the country, and you can find stuff out. So by the time you get to the ballpark, you know what might be a good question to ask, or you might know something that you found out about a player from his past. Sometimes that night, the most interesting story, more than the game, might be the 25th guy on the bench. Maybe something happened to him that just came to light, and you want to ask him about it. So the preparation to me is fun. I never really get tired of preparing for it, and it never really stops year round. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, it's different too. I mean, from when you're at home to on the road. When I'm at home, I was getting the Tampa Bay Times delivered every single day. Now I just get it on Wednesdays and Sundays. But you get into a routine. Baseball is all about routine, and when I'm at home, it's wake up in the morning, read the paper. Check the internet. I love reading the paper because there might be something that Mark Topkin, our beat writer, might have picked up in the game or in the post game that maybe we didn't talk about during the game or didn't hear in Neil's post game show. And so there could be a little tidbit that Topper comes up with that intrigues me and gets us ready for the next day. Read up on the other team for a while, and then next thing you know, it is around lunchtime. Now I leave for the ballpark usually on a day game at about 2:15, 2:30. Like to try to get to Tropicana Field between 3 and 3:30, and we have our pregame interview with Kevin on a daily basis. With Joe Madden, it got to the point where our 7-minute interviews with Joe would take almost 45 minutes because we'd go into his office at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, whatever the case may be. And the first 20, 25 minutes were kind of, just, hey, what did you do today? He went for his bike ride. I went to Portillo's or did this. And we talk about, what happened here or there and everywhere. And then next thing you know, we're talking about Casey Kasem's American Top 40 from 1979 that was on the day before. And can you believe that, why would anybody leave the cake out in the rain with Donna Summers' MacArthur Park? And just so obscure stuff. And the next thing you know, we do our interview, and then we spend the next 15 or 20 minutes talking about the game and what he might do here. And he would show us his scorecard. Kevin's a little more closer to the vest on things, but Kevin's opened up here over the last few years as well. And it's different with Kevin. Kevin's a little more hands-on on the field. So when we're at home, we do the interview in the dugout, and it's usually a little compressed. If he could make our 7-minute interview 5 minutes, he would. But we talk for about 10 or 15 minutes at home, but it's a little bit longer on the road when we do it in the office. And then, you get a lot of information from other broadcasters. Andy touched on Twitter. Twitter's a huge tool that we use throughout the game, but talking to other broadcasters, and then 6 o'clock comes and it's dinner time. And then next thing you know, and I think one of the things that Andy and I try to do too, and I don't know if we're unique to this or other broadcasters do it, but it's not all about baseball and broadcasting 24/7. We get into the booth after maybe a tough stretch for a couple of games, and we'll put on a highlight of Rodney Dangerfield being out with Johnny Carson, or we'll play back a couple of videos from something in Tommy Boy to make us laugh, or put on a Chris Farley video from Saturday Night Live, but something to make us laugh, to break up the monotony of baseball, plain and simple. So again, we know why we're here. We know what we get paid to do. But I think we also know when it's time to kind of pull back. And I think we learned a little bit of that from Joe Madden. But I think, again, we use our time in the booth. It's not always about the Rays and broadcasting. We know that there are times where we need to take a breath and put something on YouTube and laugh for 5 minutes to kind of break up the monotony sometimes of what it is, a 162-game baseball season.
And plus, you never know when you're going to get involved in an 11-1 game by the 4th inning. And, how do I keep the audience? I often think, that quarter hour just happened. I wonder how many people we held from one to the other, because that's what the radio station's trying to do. You're trying to hold an audience. So if, you're not going to be on the edge of your seat of an 11-1 game. So maybe we can maybe downshift a little bit from the game, not go away from it. But maybe if we get each other laughing or talk about something else. It's funny. One of the things that I've found over the years is how many people come up to me and mention something that Dave or I said, maybe about our personal lives, or something that our kids had said, some little nugget that came out during some 15-1 game, and I forgot I talked about it. And I remember we had a 17 or 18 inning game in Minnesota a couple of years ago. And I kept getting these dispatches from my wife that my kids would not go to bed until the game was over. And she's sending me pictures. The two of them got their sleeping bags out. They're on the sofa. They refused to go to bed. And I talked about it, and I got more texts from that than I just couldn't believe it. People saying, my kids were the same way. You touch a nerve with somebody, and sometimes opening up and sharing a little bit about yourself, I think can be a lot of fun on the air.
I have one more thing I wanted to ask you guys about, and I don't know if I'm going to embarrass you saying this, but I love listening to the two of you, not just because you both call a game well, but because when one guy is calling the play-by-play, the other guy is still present, not only present in person, but present on the air. You hear from the other announcer. And in listening to baseball throughout my life, when you have a team with two play-by-play announcers, sometimes it seems like when one person is doing the play-by-play, the other person might be getting a hot dog. Like, you just don't even hear from them. And I think it really enhances your broadcast. And I've said that Rays fans are lucky to have the two of you as their radio announcers. And I'm just wondering, like, was that a conscious decision that the two of you made about how you wanted your broadcast to go? That, if one guy's doing 5 innings and the other guy's doing 4, fine, but you're both involved for all 9 innings.
Yeah, I think both Andy and I grew up in areas though that had 2-man booths. I grew up in Chicago that it wasn't just Harry. It was Harry and Jimmy Pearsall, or it was Harry and Steve Stone, or it was again Lauren Brown and Joe McConnell. So I think by growing up in an area, for me anyway, and this is my answer, growing up in an area where there were always 2 men in the booth, I just thought that's the way it was supposed to be. I do see what you're saying. There are, again, thanks to Sirius XM and the MLB app, you do listen to a lot of other broadcasts, and there is no interaction. And I find that to be very, very boring and very, very mundane, and it doesn't keep my interest, during a ball game or during a broadcast. So I think it was a conscious effort from the fact that, for me, that's the way I always thought it was supposed to be. I know in the minor leagues, there were certain games where, like I said, on the road, where I would do them by myself. And I quite honestly, even going back to when I did pregame, postgame with the White Sox, I enjoyed my postgame shows a heck of a lot better when I had Bill Melton there than I did when I was by myself. And some people might think, well, now it's just you. Wow, it's got to be a lot better when you're by yourself. No, it's not. The beauty of baseball is to be able to talk about different things that are going on down in the field, what just happened, having a conversation about it. And like we said before, the individuals that I've talked to say that it feels like we're sitting right next to you at the bar while we're watching the game together. And I think that's one of the things that I grew up with. And I think that's one of the reasons why I feel most comfortable when we're both doing games together. And I'm glad that it's worked out this way.
Yeah, I worked alone a lot in the minor leagues, and it was good training in the sense that it sharpened focus. If you can do a Florida State League game by yourself, then my goodness, working in the big leagues with a partner you like is I don't want to say easy, but it's certainly a lot less stress. I like working with Dave for so many reasons. I mean, if I had a partner, very rarely have I ever had a partner in this career of mine that I didn't enjoy being with. But I've never been with a partner longer than Dave. And because we know each other so well, I really trust him a lot on the air. And I like that I can learn something from him. Dave will often give me a different perspective of a play that I wasn't even thinking of. And thank goodness, because who wants to just hear your own self-talk constantly? Plus, it's just a lot more fun. I think people get a real kick out of hearing 2 people that enjoy the game. And like David said many times, it's not the Dave and Andy show or the Andy and Dave show as much as it's about Rays baseball. We both believe very strongly in promoting the Rays. We like the team that we work for. We like the industry we work for. Sometimes it can make it difficult. But, if a bad moment's happening, you'll know it just from what Dave and I are bouncing off of each other. We don't have to sit there and root for the team or begrudge the team. You can just tell from, just like Dave said, if you're bellying up to the bar, that's the conversations that we have in the off season are probably very similar to what it sounds like on the air. We just, for whatever reason, enjoy hanging out. We're very different people. I think that's a strength too. I think we have a little Siskel and Ebert in us sometimes, where it's okay to disagree about something. If he agreed with everything I said or vice versa, that would just get so boring after a while. I like that we have different perspectives, and as long as there's a respect to it. And I think over the course of time that, I like that very much. It took me a while to realize, it took me a couple of years to realize that it's good when we disagree about things. And now I really cherish it, because I think both of us know enough about the game, we're confident in the way we're going to explain things, that maybe we can teach each other things. I know I learn more from Dave probably than anybody.
Well, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me today. I certainly hope that you're back to work soon and we get to hear you guys on the radio again.
My wife
your dog likes having you around, though, right?
Bella's about the only one, the female in this house that appreciates me being his home as much as I am. But the other 2 are ready to get Dad out the door as soon as possible.
Well, Dave said to me the other day, or said somewhere, said his goal to this offseason is trying to stay married, and I'm dealing with that too.
Well, for your marriage sake, for your sanity's sake, for your professional sake, in terms of staying sharp, I hope you're back to work soon, both selfishly and also for your well-being. But
Yes.
Thanks for taking the time today. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Hopefully the fans did too, and hope to see you guys soon.
It will be
Hope
fun
to hear you. Hope to hear you again too, Dave. And thank you again for having us. This was a blast. Hope we can do something like this a little more often. It's fun.
Go Bolts and raise up.
All right. The great Dave Wells and Andy Freed. Thanks so much.